Welcome to OnTargetHTML5.com. I'm Mike, your host, and in this tutorial we're actually going to be building a pure HTML and CSS3 photo slideshow. No JavaScript, nothing but HTML and CSS, and it's actually a pretty cool slideshow. You're going to get to see it in 1 second. So in this tutorial I'm actually going to walk you step by step as we build our HTML document. I am going to walk you step by step as we build our CSS file. We're actually going to do two different types of demonstrations. We're actually going to have a five character image or a 5 photo slideshow and a 7 photo slideshow, so I can show you different ways of using keyframes in CSS. And when we're done, you're actually going to have a slideshow that performs just like this, and it's built using nothing but HTML and CSS. Up until a couple of years ago, that wasn't possible. This is really cool. It's a very neat feature now with some of the new properties we have in CSS. So jump on into this tutorial and take advantage of actually building your own slideshow for your own website using nothing but HTML and CSS. I look forward to seeing you in the tutorial. All right, so let's get started on this relatively cool project. I think this is a very cool project because, again, up until a couple of years ago, you couldn't do things like this without using JavaScript. All right, so the first thing I want to do, I am using Atom, the text editor Atom, and I actually have a plugin called Emmet. So if you see some very interesting shortcuts on my screen, it's because I'm actually using that plugin, which allows me to do some shortcuts. And it's got a lot of nice cool features built in. I am starting out with a CSS file folder inside my slideshow folder and an images folder where I actually have 7 images that I'll be using for the demonstration. I'm going to create a brand new file, because the first thing we need to do is actually create our HTML file. I'm going to save this in the root as start.html. And that's going to be our starting file. I'm actually going to build an HTML5 template, and this is going to be my starting file for my actual HTML element. We're going to actually do the HTML elements first, and then we'll work into our CSS file. So I've got a doc type, HTML, HTML language of English. In my head section, I got a UTF-8 character set. I've set up my viewport for this so this can be responsive. I actually have my HTTP equivalent UA compatible for IE Edge. And right below that, I'm actually going to add my style sheet link. So I'm going to come down there, I'm going to add a link element. And that link element is going to go to my CSS file. And I'm going to name my CSS file main.css for this particular demonstration. And that's only if I spell main correctly. That would have been a pretty silly mistake. Probably would have driven me crazy too. Then I want to go ahead and give my document a name. And the name for this particular tutorial is going to be Building an HTML and CSS Slideshow. So I'm just going to type that in here because we should always have a name. I'm going to go ahead and save those changes. Good time to pause if you want to go ahead and get those typed in, because now we're actually going to move into the body section of our document. And inside the body section, the first thing I want to do is I want to add an H1, which is going to be the title for our page. So I'm just going to add an H1 element, no classes or anything. This is going to be a pure HTML and CSS slideshow. What I mean by pure is that we are not going to be using any JavaScript. Right below our H1 element, I want to go ahead and add a div. And I'm going to give the div a class of slideshow. This is one of the shortcuts I was talking about with Emmet. You can actually just put the, I'm sorry, that's supposed to be an ID, not a div. So I want my hash sign, or octothorpe as they like to call it. But I can actually put the octothorpe and then the ID name, and then just hit the tab key, and it actually creates the ID, the div with the ID for me, which is kind of cool, actually. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I like it. I'm going to go ahead and put a comment at the bottom of this. Closing slideshow div. Anyone that's done any of my tutorials knows I like to comment these because we tend to get a bunch of them very close together towards the end. Inside the slideshow, I want to create another div. This one's going to have a class of slide wrapper. So I'm going to use the period, again, because I'm using Emmet, give it a class of slide wrapper, hit my tab key, it's going to build my divs for me, and it's going to add that class. And there I'm actually going to put an element, or not an element, what am I saying? I'm going to put a comment there too. So I'm just going to say that that is the closing slide wrapper div. And inside that div, we're actually going to have another div. And this div is going to have a class of slide. We're almost done with the divs. This is what's actually going to contain my text for my images and the actual ID or the class for the image itself. Inside there, I'm going to put a paragraph element. And inside this particular paragraph, actually I want to give this a class also. So I'm going to give this a class that is equal to slide-text, because we'll be styling that text that's actually going to appear on our images. Inside this particular paragraph tag, I'm going to say the bay was unbelievable in its beauty. And I'm going to end it with an exclamation point. This will be the last one you have to watch me type. This is how we're actually going to be setting up the images inside of our HTML structure. I'm going to go ahead and save all these changes. Good time to pause if you want to get those typed in. What I want to do now is I'm actually going to copy this and paste it 4 times. So I'm going to do Control-C on the PC, Command-C on the Mac. And I'm going to come down and I'm going to paste it 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then I'm going to go ahead and clean up my indentations here. And then I just got to change this text because I'm going to have obviously different text for each image. So I'm just going to kind of clean up my indentation. And again, I'll give you in a second, I'll give you a moment to get this in. Let me go ahead and add the text for the images. The first one was the bay was unbelievable in its beauty. The second one was the city was fabulous. I'm just going to go ahead and copy that from my notes and type that in, or paste that in here. Let's get rid of that second exclamation point. That actually should be inside the paragraph tag. The next one was the bridge blew me away, but it was especially scary when I was crossing it. And actually that's very true with this image. It was a pretty scary bridge and it was kind of scary to cross. And the next one is going to be the way we had lunch on this overlook. I'm going to add that one next. And then the last one for this particular part of the tutorial is going to be, man, was it cold. And actually when you see the hiking across this snow, it was very cold. I'm going to go ahead and save all those changes. So now we've actually set up the structure as well as the first 5 images that we're going to play with. We're actually going to do 5 and then 7 because I want to show you how I did some of the calculations. I'm going to save all these changes. Good time to pause for you to get that typed in. I'm actually going to scroll down just a tad right below my actual wrapper for the slideshow itself, where I actually closed out my slideshow. I'm actually going to put an H2 in there with some additional text. And again, this is just for my benefit, actually for yours if you're interested. A slideshow added to an HTML page with nothing but HTML and CSS, no JavaScript. And that's actually a pretty big deal. I'm going to go ahead and save this. Good time to pause if you want to get that H2 typed in. I am going to go ahead and refresh my browser window, but first, before I do that, I need to actually drag the file over to my browser window. Let me drag that start.html file in the browser window, and you'll see now that we've got all the text that we've added to that HTML page. So we're ready to go to actually start styling this so we can actually start setting up the images and setting up the animation effects. And again, I'm going to stop right there. Good time to pause if you didn't get anything in the top half. And I'm going to scroll down to the bottom half. Another good time to pause if you need to look through any of that. And now we're getting ready to go ahead and add the CSS to our application. All right, so the first thing I want to do, let's go ahead and create the actual CSS file itself. I'm going to scroll back to the top of our page. We named our CSS file main.css, and we actually put it in the CSS folder. So I'm going to create a new document, or a new file. I am going to save the file as main.css inside our CSS folder. This is where we'll be putting all the styling for this particular sheet. And the first thing I want to do is style our body element. So I'm going to come right into my CSS document, and I am going to put in a comment on Target HTML5, building a pure slideshow. I'm going to address the body element. I'm going to assign a font family of Arial and sans serif. padding of 5% around top, bottom, left, and right, and a text align of center. And again, I'm going to go ahead and save these changes. Good time to pause for you to get that typed in. I just want to test to make sure that everything's connected correctly to my HTML document. So I'm going to go in the browser window and refresh. And we've got our new font, and we actually have everything centered as it should be. So that's perfect. Now let's go and address the ID of slideshow. Remember, we actually put an ID of slideshow on the div that contains all of our slides. I am going to come down and addressing that ID, I'm going to come right below my body elements. And I'm going to say ID of slideshow. I want your overflow hidden. I want your height to be 438 pixels. Your width to be 650 pixels. Your margin is top and bottom 0 and left and right auto. That's actually going to center the slideshow on our page. It's also going to set the height and width of my images. These are the images that I'm actually using in the images folder. And again, this will actually set up the images so if they're a little larger than the 438 by 650, it's going to take care of that. And you're actually going to see if they're a little smaller, we're actually going to use something when we actually set up the image itself in CSS that will cover the entire area. But you'd still probably want images relatively close to that size. I'm going to go ahead and refresh the browser window. We shouldn't see any change other than the fact we've actually set up the area now for our image. I'm going to come in right below that, and I'm going to address the class of slide wrapper. And now we're actually looking at this class that encloses all the images themselves. I'm going to set this up as if it was a film strip. So I'm going to go and address the class slide wrapper. I'm going to come right down below my slideshow ID, and I'm going to say slide wrapper, your width is 450 pixels. I'm going to set up an animation property of slide. It's going to transpire over 30 seconds. It's going to be linear and it's going to be infinite. So it's going to continue to run regardless of the number of images that we have. Once it gets to the end, it's just going to go back to the beginning and start again. I'm getting this 450 pixels from the length of the images that I'm using. I'm actually going to end this up with 7 images when we're all finished and complete, and it's going to be 4,550 pixels long. That's how this film strip, I look at it like a film strip, and that's how it's going to be. And that's where I got that number from. Next thing I want to do is I want to set up the class of slide. And slide is the class that we gave each one of our images. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to tell my slide class inside my CSS document. I'm going to say slide, I want you to float left. So now I'm taking the individual images, I'm floating them left. I'm giving them a height of 438 pixels and a width of 650 pixels. I'm going to come down right below that, and we're actually going to set up the first image. So I'm going to come in here, and right below my slide class, I'm going to say slide class nth child 1. So I'm actually looking at the first child now inside the slide class. So I'm looking at this particular div, that number 1 div. And I'm saying I want you to have a background URL underscore, or I'm sorry, background URL in quotation marks / that's going to take me up a directory because I'm in the CSS folder. I'm going into the images folder and loading the travel_1.jpg. Again, I'm setting it for no repeat, and I want the background size to cover. The reason I'm doing that is if the image is a little bit smaller than the height and width that we've set up, it's going to cover that entire space anyway. And again, I've got the images already set up in my images folder. I'm going to go ahead and save these changes because now is actually a pretty good time for you to catch up on where we're at. Let me slide up just a tad. And it's also a good time for us to check to see how things appear in our browser window because we've got our first image loaded.